You're listening to Coding Blocks, episode 33. Subscribe to us and leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, and more using your favorite podcast app.
Visit us at codingblocks.net where you can find show notes, examples, discussion, and more.
And send your feedback, questions, and rants to comments at codingblocks.net. And follow us on Twitter at codingblocks or head to www.codingblocks.net and find all our social links there at the top of the page. And with that, welcome to Coding Blocks. I'm Alan Underwood.
I'm Joe Zach.
And I'm Michael Outlaw. This episode is sponsored by DigitalOcean. Over 550,000 developers have already deployed to their cloud. You too could deploy your own droplet in 55 seconds. Their options start at $5 per month, and you only pay for the time used when your droplet is live. Use the offer code CodingBlocks and get a $10 credit towards your new DigitalOcean account.
All right, so let's go ahead and get rolling with some podcast news. First, there was a big oops in the last one that I got to call out. And people who listened to the episode probably were like, what in the world, man? Like, Outlaw and Joe are like the most rude people on the planet. Because there was a section there for like 2.5 minutes where they were talking and I'd start to say something and then they would talk over me. And then they'd say something else and it seemed like there was a pause and I'd start talking and it sounded like they just railroaded me. One of the cables came unplugged. We were all remote. We were recording remote on that episode, and a cable came unplugged on mine. So I was talking, and then they just talk over me. I'm like, man, why are these guys being jerks tonight, right?
I thought that got edited out there.
So
right?
That's the thing. Joe did go back and edit it out, but anybody who was already subscribed to the podcast got the initial one that came down.
So there was an initial version that went out that didn't have that correction.
Yeah. So
okay.
So there's a good 2.5 minutes.
Well, I'm just going to talk all over you the whole time,
right
here.
Right.
So go ahead and try to say something now. Let's see how this works out. Joe, you want to chime in right now?
I'm going to mute Outlaw. But
I'm not even chewing gum. Why,
dude? It was actually pretty funny because I'm listening to it. And once I was like, man, this is oh, that's right. That's when the cable came unplugged. So if you did hear that, they weren't being jerks. I totally had come unplugged, and that just happened. So,
or were we being jerks? Maybe that should be the survey.
That's possible too, right?
Yeah, we keep talking about again. We forgot to come up with a survey beforehand. I even tried.
Ooh, I have a good one though. I have a good one.
Oh, okay. Let's do it right now. What is it?
Is the Surface Book real? Like, is it something that people want or not? The new Surface Book, the Microsoft Surface Book.
Okay.
Is it something that people want or not? That versus the iPad Pro. Even though they're not really the same type thing, but I don't know. Maybe that's a bad
sounds like
one.
your survey already fell apart.
Apparently, yeah. Never mind. All right. That worked out well.
Maybe we should stick with our Joe and Michael jerks for talking over Alan.
Yeah, there we go.
Well, we did have a survey last episode.
We did.
Yep.
Yeah, but we didn't remember. What I'm getting at though is that we didn't talk about
time.
it beforehand, so we didn't know what to say on the as we were recording. So it was something that we threw together afterwards. But I like it better if we have something to talk about actually as we record.
Yeah, we'll have to
Whatever.
go over the previous numbers in our next one because we totally forgot about it.
Maybe by we're only 33 episodes in, so maybe give it another 33, and maybe by then we'll have something worked out to where we're familiar with what we need to prepare for the show.
Yeah, don't we go through 15 minutes of setup every time? Man, why is our audio not working every single time? So, yeah.
That's because you got too many knobs on this thing, man.
Right, yeah. We'll get this working one day.
Sponsored by Yamaha over here.
Hey, it works. Kind of. Don't make me ever rewire it.
Oh, and speaking of last episode, we did get a nice comment from Mark Tinsley referring to PHP's Composer. And we pick on PHP a lot, but Composer looks really nice and looks like a really good dependency management tool.
Yeah, very cool. I forgot about that. It's been a while since we recorded, man. We've been insanely busy.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
So it actually...
I thought this was episode 1.
Right? It feels good to get back in here. So
yeah, it does.
Hopefully you guys missed us as much as we missed you. So,
man, one last thing about last episode. No one commented on my Thunder, which I worked so hard on. So I spent 45 minutes.
I think it was more like the shock and the shock and awe that Alan and I had that we experienced when we heard it.
Yeah.
That was not real thunder, correct?
No, it was. It took a long time for me to kind of like isolate and kind of get it all set up. But yeah, I was not going to use a cheesy thunder sound. Like I wanted the real scary thunder.
Very nice. I like that. That was awesome.
It was like the sound of 1,000 alligators being dropped on his roof.
I know the right survey we can do, the poll. Do people like the music behind the ad spots, or would they rather it without? Because Outlaw hates it. Me and Joe are like, let's get our groove on. We like this. So that might be the poll.
Man,
you guys will just have to visit this episode to find out.
How about this? This should be the survey. Are surveys, on the fly surveys, a good thing or a bad thing?
Right.
So far, this is going horribly wrong.
Right. And we're like 10 minutes in and we haven't talked about anything code related. So that's awesome. Yeah. Anyways. All right. So, Jay-Z, you want to hit us with some review info?
Yep. We got some really great reviews this time. Rum and Rum, awesome name. More Cowbell 8008. Tenorant and Dick Dingus, all really great reviews. So we really appreciate that.
Yeah, one of them even said, hey, even PHP developers listen to you guys, which was kind of cool, right? Like, I mean, we've never, I don't think, really dogged on them, but I don't think we've ever called it out either. So, yeah, I mean, that's really awesome. Thanks for that. And we got a killer one over on Stitcher. So, I mean, you guys, thank you for taking the time to do that. It really makes our day.
I just wonder, though, like if he was kind of having some fun at our expense with that name, because his review name, the name, his Twitter handle name was like Eddie something. I can't remember. Help me out here.
I can't remember.
On Stitcher, he used a completely different name, and I wonder if he did that because he knew we were going to read it.
Let me go back.
Because Joe, do you want to say it again?
No, we're good. But you know what? One thing that I do want to say about his particular review that he did over on Stitcher, and it was Dick Dingus. The thing that was awesome about it, though, was the fact that he said that he typically just does standard CRUD type stuff at his job. And I think a lot of us have fallen into this to where you kind of, I don't know, you fall into a bit of a rut because you're used to doing the same thing over and over. And he said this kind of reignited his passion for doing things the right way and learning and building those skills. So that was really cool. That was exciting to read that we've kind of ignited that flame again. So
here, Eddie Peters. So I'm not convinced that he used his real name. One of those places he didn't use his real name. So at this point, I'm going to have to assume that Twitter is the right one. I could be wrong.
Yeah, it's entertaining either way.
One of those, he was having some fun with us.
So, hey, Joe also has other news, which is kind of cool and insane.
Yeah, I was a little embarrassed last episode when I was referring to like Bower and other things as dependency management tools, and they, whatever. But I wanted to try and make like a modern JavaScript application, and so I made like a little game using a bunch of different libraries, and I won't get too much into it, but we'll have a link in the show notes where you can go check it out. And it's not a very good game, and I kind of stole the idea from like one of the first Game Boy games. And it's like even worse than the Game Boy game. But you guys should go check it out and like tell me all the stuff that I did wrong.
I didn't play it. You did, right?
Yeah. Notice how he said like a bunch of different libraries, right? Like, because you can't, JavaScript is like Ruffles potato chips. You can't just have one, right?
Yep. Yeah, and like I'll add one and I'll be trying to figure out how to do something with it, and everyone's like, "Oh, don't use that one." And like sometimes I remember to remove it, sometimes I don't. So there's all sorts of crap in there that and it's like only a 200-line application. I don't know what half of it does. It's just all like bringing in other crap.
But hold on a second. Isn't that where .NET's going to? Like, you're just going to start bringing in 5,000 different dependencies? So
yeah.
So you're complaining about JavaScript, but it looks like Microsoft took a little note out of Node's book and said, hey, let's just make everything some sort of package. So, yeah.
Maybe.
Yep.
And it's nice. Like, I would bring in libraries for a single function. Like, I think at one point I had like a function that would just shuffle an array, like just randomize an array. Like I brought in essentially a library for it, and it was just a real small thing. It's nice to do that with those modules.
That's kind of cool. I mean, it makes things a little bit more painful when you're trying to gather it all together, but I mean, the fact that it's there is
I feel
nice.
like I feel like Steve Gibson would hate you for doing that.
Oh, absolutely. Steve Gibson would hate me for a lot of reasons.
Well,
You brought in
didn't
an entire library so that you could make one function call.
Yeah, but Gibson also wrote stuff in assembly, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's no fun. Nobody wants to do that.
And in fairness, the library was just for shuffling an array. Like it's done. Like all it does is just randomize arrays using like a well-known algorithm.
That's awesome.
All right. So what was your takeaway from the experience though? Were you like, oh my God, I get it. This is awesome. Or were you like, oh, JavaScript.
Well, it's like what I thought was most interesting. It's like, oh wow, there's all this really these nice libraries and nice tooling. But the thing is, I need those nice libraries and the toolings to make it bearable. So it kind of evens things out for me. So I feel good about it. I had a good experience. It's fun. I plan on doing more. But I can't really sing the praises because I feel like it wasn't so much helping me out as it was just kind of getting me normal, getting me straight.
That's cool.
All right. So the server side guy becomes the UI guy. That's
Yeah.
basically the takeaway from that.
Yeah, that's kind
Yeah,
of
because
interesting.
he said he was going to do more of it.
Yeah.
Yep.
We'll follow this closely. One other thing. All right, so the past few weeks I've been incredibly busy. I think all of us have. And one of the things I wanted to bring up that harkens back to episode 23 is encapsulation.
It's crazy that we got that many.
Oh my dear God. If you write software, please write it in a way to where you encapsulate things properly. I literally spent ridiculous amounts of hours trying to make heads or tails of something that was intended to be a reusable component, but it had like little tentacles that reached out to everything else. And so trying to figure out what this thing actually did was nearly impossible. Like, I mean, it's one of those things to where when you're making it, if you're the person making it, you understand everything you did, right? As soon as somebody else has to pick that up, you now have this logic spread out all over the place that reaches into these things that are seemingly completely unrelated. And so you have no idea what the side effects are if you try and pull those things back out. Like, encapsulation can save you in so many ways. One, you can actually test it properly. Two, you can understand if something changes in there, you know where it changed. Do your best. I know we kind of laughed about, I think in one of the previous recent episodes, Joe's like, hey, just make it a global variable. And I agree to a certain extent. If you were just trying to get something out the door, proof of concept, you want to get something out, it's a minimal viable product, do it. But know that there is a cost to it. And if you start writing all your software like that, that cost will come back to bite you, and it will be very difficult to maintain. So, if you haven't listened to episode 23, please do go give it a listen and realize that encapsulation is really a huge key in writing maintainable software.
Yep.
It
And
sounds like though, am I misunderstanding? Because like part of what you were complaining about in your statement just now though is you were saying like it was reaching out into other things, right? Like that's beyond encapsulation though.
Oh, it's way
Right,
past
like-
encapsulation.
Okay.
But
Okay.
if they had
I was
encapsulated...
like, well, wait a minute, because encapsulation is just like hiding implementation.
Well, it's not just hiding implementation, right? It's setting something up so that it's aware of itself, right? It's
hiding
it's
the
both.
behavior in the data.
Right. It's both. But this thing literally would go out and pull data from places that you assumed were there that weren't necessarily, right? Like this was supposed to be a reusable component, and it was not in any sense of the words, because you couldn't plug it in anywhere else because there were so many dependencies on these other things that would never have existed unless you recreated exactly what they had in the other environment. And I don't know. So encapsulation does have to do with how you store your variables and how you access them and all that. But it also is this whole idea of a closed area, right? That's the reason why you hide implementation and all that, is because you have this black box of functionality. And that this thing did not, right? Like it was just an open book, and it felt like a choose your own adventure type thing. Like you went here and it was like, go to page 83, and it's like, oh my God, what's on page 83? And
Right.
it was just, it was so frustrating.
Well, it sounds like for anyone that hasn't caught up on the back catalog, then it sounds like it's more than just the episode 23 that you'd want to catch up on. Then
We have another one for that. I don't.
well, I mean, because I'm just like listening to like some of what your complaints are, but some of it just sounds more like
Solid.
Kind of thinking like Solid's one of them. Some of the patterns, come to mind. Design patterns come to mind.
It wasn't so much patterns. I think Solid, the whole open close principle, that kind of thing.
Solid would definitely apply.
Solid would. It's a little over the top, maybe even in some cases, which we discussed back then. I don't remember what episode that was, but definitely between the two, like there should be like set defined inputs and outputs, and the implementation inside should be basically hidden from everybody, which is your encapsulation. But it's worth noting that if you just start writing things that basically
I just didn't want
reach
anyone
out,
to hear that and think like, based off the things that you were saying, that it was encapsulation only though.
No,
that's what I was wanting to get at.
It's both.
Yeah.
So
I wonder, should we ask Joe if the game that he made was Solid? Did he adhere to Solid?
No, not at all. A lot of stuff. I tried to get it testable. I wanted it to be solid, but like, man, it was just so murderous. Just trying to get libraries, like some that had been written for with Node in mind, and some that had been written like kind of counting on there being a browser and getting all that crap working together was, man, it wasn't fun.
Huh.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, front end testing. I actually listened to an episode of JavaScript Jabber recently where they were talking about testing front end UI type stuff. Man, that is a whole ball of wax when it comes to like browsers. Like maybe it's something we'll try and dedicate an episode to in the future, but it's not something that you can take lightly. Yeah, it's a major undertaking.
What's terrible is with the game, it's like if I want to test, what happens when you finish a level, like that means I got to play a level. It takes a long time to test everything out.
I was joking with you about this. Remember, I was like, we need to go back to the days of Mike Tyson's Punch-Out where you have a code that'll put you back at like level 5 with whatever.
Well, yeah, and I actually joked and brought up episode 30 with the memento pattern.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Why, I'm surprised you didn't implement that, man.
Yeah, if you want to be able to save a game, it's a great way of doing it.
Yeah, so a lot of fun. Definitely go check out his thing. I mean, it's fully functional. I didn't have time to play with it, but I will probably this week now. So,
yeah,
and be sure to let him know about the bugs. He loves that part.
Yep.
Yeah.
I might have bothered him once or twice.
I think I fixed everything you found. So,
yeah.
Yep.
All right. So, are we ready to get into tonight's topic?
Let's do it.
Yeah, I wanted to catch this up real
Loke.
quick. So we're doing a second pass here at the 12-factor app, talking about the 4, 5, and 6 here. But just wanted to let you know, if you aren't familiar with the 12-factor app, that you might want to check out the episode before this one. There's not a whole lot of catching up you really need to do. It's not going to kill you if you listen out of order with this topic, but you might want to listen anyhow. And last week we talked about specifically steps 1, 2, 3, which were code bases, dependencies, and configs. And now we're going to be talking about backing services, build, release, run, and processes.
Oh, man, when you said episodes 4, 5, and 6, I got all excited. I thought we were talking about Star Wars. I'm all prepared for the wrong thing.
Beta looks great.
Start over.
All right.
All right, so number 4 today, kicking things off, is backing services. And what is a backing service? It's any resource that is consumed over the network. And these are things like databases, cloud services, mail servers. I mean, the list goes on and on. If you've done any programming, you're familiar with these things. It's services that you use. One of the key or interesting things that they say about this is they say network, but they really mean anything that's external to your app that you can hook into. So your database might reside on an app server. It's still a backing service. It could be running on your laptop. It's still a backing service. It's not your code. It's something that you are utilizing. So,
what about logs?
A logging service might be considered that, but I don't think logs.
That, as soon as you said, I'm like, wait, are you talking about like the actual file? What are we talking about?
It's so like logging. Like normally you would write stuff to disk, right? But I was just kind of thinking like, if you would consider the writing of the log to be a backing service. I know with Splunk and all the different ways of getting logs off of individual boxes, that things are a little bit different nowadays. But I don't know. I was just trying to think if that was something that we could really consider a back-end service, because it is a form of persistence, right?
Well, I think so. If you're writing it to a database, that's a service that you're utilizing as that database. But I don't think logging itself is. If you're using something like a queue, that would be a service that you're hooking into.
I really think Joe's trying to like skip ahead here. Like he's saying, like I'm already done with talking about chapter 4, the backing services, and let's skip to chapter 11, logs, which really seems unfair and disingenuous of you.
Yeah, I don't. Logging in and of itself wouldn't be. But if you're hooking into a service like a queue or a database or something like that, that could be a service that you're doing. Like you could mail logs. I mean, I'm sure some people do crazy things like that. So that would be utilizing the mail service. But I think logging in and of itself wouldn't be a backing service.
Yeah, I mean, the difference here, though, like your question about the logs, though, is this like, are you assuming that the log and the data in that log that you've written to it is there for a future process or a future run of the application? In which case, typically in logs, that's not the case. Like you don't care. You write it to the log and then you let something else do some aggregation of those logs. So, logs wouldn't apply in this scenario.
Yeah, and I think it's more specific to
your
your code is hooking into the service, right? Like Splunk wouldn't be it, because that's something that runs completely independent of what your application is, right?
Well, it could be something like if you were writing directly to a Splunk API or reading from a Splunk API,
yes,
then that could be a backing service that, basically in the 12-factor app, all of these backing services as they're titled should be treated as attached resources that should be accessed by some kind of they refer to it as accessed via URL or other locator or credentials. And this is information that's stored in the config, right? So we talked, configuration was one of the things that we talked about last time. And this is one of those things that can go in the config, are these type of identifiers. So connection strings, per this count.
Yep, and that's exactly what they said. It was kind of ironic, though, because in one of the previous ones that we were talking about with the configs, they said, if you open source this today, would you be safe, right? But then in this particular one, they mentioned having credentials stored in a config, and I thought that was a little bit ironic.
Well, that wasn't one that they said in the 12-factor app. That was one that we said.
Oh.
There was, and I forget why, because it was based off of like some other, there was another story that came out, and I can't remember it. It was going around LinkedIn for a while, and basically someone wrote up a story that was something along the lines of how I lost, thousands of dollars because of a bug in Visual Studio. So basically something was getting committed and pushed into a public repository that he didn't intend to, or something. I don't remember the exact story, but that's what that was. And so, we were saying like, well, hey, as part of what you're putting in your config, if your boss came to you right now and said, okay, we're pushing everything to a public GitHub repository, how fired are you? And so you're right. I do find it strange that, like, the very next chapter is talking about putting some things, and specifically they mention credentials stored in a config.
Yep.
And we had actually talked about other ways to do that using their ideas, by the way, for things like environment variables or something like that, or machine configs, machine level configs that would store those credentials that
in a safer way, something that could not accidentally get checked into a source control.
Basically, the idea here, though, while Alan tries to catch his breath, is that should you have to replace any one of these resources, though, it should just be a matter of a configuration change.
Right.
And I think that's in essence what they're really trying to get to, because they list examples of using like various SMTP services, or if you're using various database processes, the ability to just swap that out. Now, swap it out within the same architecture, though.
Right. Yeah. They're not saying go from SQL Server to Oracle.
Right.
They're saying, if you're changing a connection from a local host database to a remote database, you should just be able to change the IP or whatever it's pointing to. One other interesting thing, though, that is key to this is it should not require a code change. So anything that you do here, you can change a config file, but you should not have to redeploy code. So if you have to redeploy your code simply to change a connection, then you've violated this number 4 backing service.
Yeah, they actually list an example of where in the scenario they say, there's a database misbehaving due to a hardware issue, and the app administrator might want to spin up a new database server based off of some backup, and you just point the app to that new one. Now, for some applications, that might require an app restart, and they don't really cover that as being necessary. But I kind of I don't take that as a bad thing, though.
No, I mean, in most of your applications, they're not just going to pick up a config file on the fly. In most of them, you're going to have to restart an app pool or something like that. That's
IIS.
It's not a deploy.
Can be pretty good about picking up web config changes if we're talking specifically about that, but it does kind of get into the question of well, I don't know how much further we want to get, but later on they talk about session related kind of things, right? So if you were to not have anything session based, and so every connection that came in was checking to see like, oh, what database do I use? Then a restart may not be required.
Right, it pick it up on the fly. Right. Yeah, I mean,
you mentioned an app pool, which is definitely like an IIS.
Yeah.
It's going to have that kind of connection, but.
Well, even with Apache, I think if you modify one of the configs, a lot of times you have to do an Apache restart, depending on what the config file is and that kind of thing. So,
but that's different though, because you're describing configuring Apache versus configuring IIS, and what we're talking about is configuring the web application, which could be hosted by Apache or IIS.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So,
yeah. So. Yeah, I think we've beat up backing services pretty well. There was one other thing, though, was if you remember right, continuing from the last one, we gave these things importance ratings. And I believe Joe's the one who found the site, so I'm going to let him go with this.
Yeah, and I actually I lost the link, so I'm going to have to look that up while we're talking here.
I got it for you right here.
Awesome. What was the name of the website?
Clearlytech.com.
Awesome. Boom. And they gave this one an importance rating of high. What do you guys think about that?
I agree with that.
Oh yeah, that seems fair. Like if you have to recompile and redeploy your app just because you wanted to change the connection to a mail server or a database, like that's insane.
Yeah.
I agree with that, but it is kind of weird that there's so much carryover between this and the configs. So really, I feel like this number 4 is really kind of number 3. Which I said was high.
What did they say? What did they say 3 was? I don't remember on Clearly Tech. Do you remember?
Let me check the show notes from last episode.
You were saying that you said it was high or that they said it was high?
I'm hoping both.
If I remember right, they said their configs were only medium or something, though. And we were like, nah, that should be higher.
There was one that we disagreed with, but yeah.
Yeah, either which way.
But even in the config one, the 12-factor app does strongly recommend environment variables.
Yeah.
For that configuration.
But I would agree on this one. I think backing services is a high, and they should be decoupled. I mean, as much as possible. So.
Yeah. Let's see what.
Yeah, they have as medium.
Tech had.
They have which one is medium? The config.
Configs.
Yeah, that's the one that we thought was a little bit low.
Yeah, they say lots of companies get away without this, but you're sloppy if you do. So, yeah, it is a little strange that these chapters 3 and 4 do really go hand in hand. So to say that config is not as important, but backing services is of
more
configs. Importance.
All right, nah, they're both high.
Yeah, well, that's interesting.
All
right. So moving right along, let's skip right ahead to chapter 5. Build, release, run.
Strikes back.
No one's going to catch the Star Wars. Thanks. Wow. That's fell on deaf ears.
We thought it was just late.
Oh. No, it's not that late. So build, release, run. So This is talking about strictly separating the build and run stages of your application, right? So we have the build stage is a transform which converts the code in a repository into an executable bundle known as a build, right?
I don't like them calling it a build. Build is a verb. I think they should call them buildings.
What?
I'm sorry. I think I'm drunk on Coke Zero.
Wow.
I thought that was hilarious, by the way.
I'll tell you what. Let's just get through what the three stages are first, right? Before
so
we
sorry.
get into the commentary.
Buildings.
It's too late. Buildings. What are you talking about, man? So the get stage. Well, you can tell where I'm thinking. The build stage, I said, is a transform which converts a code repository into an executable bundle known as a build. There's the release stage that takes the build produced by the build stage and combines it with the deploy's current config. And then there's the run stage known as the runtime, which is the running execution environment. Right?
Yeah, I like that the release is a combination of the build with the config. I thought that was pretty cool, and it kind of implies that you can kind of mix and match those things. You can take different builds with different configs, and yeah, it's kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean, the key is you can set it up to point to multiple different, deploy areas, and that's how you got to mix them in differently for those, right? So, I mean...
Well, I mean, it kind of goes back to, which one was it from the last episode? I guess maybe it was Codebase? No. There was one where we were talking about like having a deploy on, maybe it was under the config that we were talking about it, where like you could have multiple deploys of the same code, right? But using different environment variables, it would be essentially, according to this definition, it could be a different release, right?
Yeah, and one thing I like here too is because it takes the build that's done in the first stage and combines it with configs, it implies that you're using like the same, basically generated the same build, the same binaries, if you will. And MS Dev Show just had a recent interview with Donovan Brown that was really good. And they were talking about Azure's release management. And one thing that I thought was really cool there is they talked about with this new product, it kind of changed things a little bit with TFS so that you could actually take the same, build output and move it to like QA environment, and then take those same binaries and move them to staging, and then take the same binaries and move it to production. So there's never any question over what's been tested and what hasn't. It's not like you're like, okay, this looks good, let's build another package for production, and introducing any variability there.
Yeah, I like that, and that is that's possible as a side effect of having the config done properly, right? Which was chapter 3.
Yep.
Right. Of having like what's truly important, because we as a refresher, right, some of the things that we talked about that go into that can fit into your config file were things that were important to the application that that aren't going to change per environment, but those things that were going to change per environment, those were the environment variables.
Right.
One
of the additional things here is, and we've actually had discussion about this before as well, is when you do have a release, you're supposed to tag that with something, whether it's an incrementing number, version 101, or whether it's a timestamp. And some people, this is actually a topic that's kind of comical to me because I'm fairly indifferent to it. I kind of prefer the timestamp just because you know when it happens. But I've heard people like passionately debate whether or not it should be a version number.
Right.
Or
this is definitely in one of those var wars.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which tabs versus spaces and var or not to var.
What's your preference, Joe? I know you do quite a few builds.
They don't call it Microsoft Windows 2015 October 11th.
They do in the builds.
That's true.
Man, I don't care what you market it as. The build, I like the date.
I do like having the date in there because it gives you a point in reference that is human.
Yeah, man.
Sensical, right? Like
some random number, like that's meaningless. Like
you have to go
cares?
look it up, and that's what sucks, right? Like eventually, what you're going to do is go look up the tag somewhere just to find the date that
you look
it
at the tag
on.
annotation to see when it was made,
right?
And that way you get a date. Like who cares? Like really,
I
version
care.
numbers.
Don't take this
version
away
numbers.
from me.
No.
So you like the minimum, or not the, what is it? The minor and the revision numbers.
Yeah, I like to know
God.
how big of a change this is. You know, if it's just a minor change or a major, you know, the date doesn't tell me anything about that.
Okay, so what if we do 1.0
Oh my
dot 1 dot 2015?
Yes.
I'm going to start like adding 10 to every major version just to mess with Joe so they'll think like big things happened.
That's so
and all I'm
wrong.
going to do is change like, you know, a little string here and there.
Oh,
That's so
no.
wrong.
Like
Oh,
that
no.
that version number, that's only for marketing people. Like they're the only ones that are going to care about the version. But from a developer perspective, the build, a timestamp of the build is far more beneficial, far more, you know, informational.
I think I have the answer. There should be like a tag feature that gives you both.
If it
Are
can only
you trying to make
annotate
a joke
itself.
to me?
Or something.
Like,
Oh,
why
that
can't the
reminds me.
tag keep track of the time it was tagged?
Since we're talking about version numbers, and then you just reminded me of a joke because, you know, one of our friends gave us a joke that he's been asking, like, hey, are you going to say this joke? So I might as well say it, you know, like, why did Microsoft name it Windows 10?
Oh.
Anyone?
789.
Because Windows 7, 8, 9.
Yes.
There you go. Now it's been said.
Very nice.
Hey, one more thing on this that I think is key and cannot be it cannot be overvalued. Like, it needs to happen. This whole flow that they're talking about here basically requires that you have a build server in place so that when you are committing code, releases happen.
I beg to differ.
Builds are initiated by the app's developers whenever new code is deployed. Runtime execution, by contrast, can happen automatically in such cases as a server reboot, blah, blah, blah. So it implies it. It doesn't say it has to be there, but if you want to ease your life and not have to be doing manual builds all the time.
Okay, definitely, you know, if you can automate your builds, that is definitely going to make life easier on you. Definitely.
Yes.
No arguments there. But what I'm saying, though, is that this isn't really necessarily saying that that's part of it or a requirement
Not
of
required,
it. This
yeah.
is saying that the stage itself is taking the binary produced from the build and combining it with that deploys current config, which could just be as simple. The release stage could be just as simple as, like, you know, copying over a binary onto a particular Linux instance under its particular user directory that it's going to run as, and then boom, that's your
You're
release
done,
stage,
right?
Because that user that it's going to run as might already have the environment variable set up for that configuration, right? And there you go. That's the release stage.
Yeah, it's not a requirement, but if you ever have worked in an environment where you have a lot of moving pieces and you're constantly having to produce builds, like, it can become almost a second full-time job to be constantly updating these things all over the place. So if you can and you have the time, setting up a build server to help automate some of this stuff can be like just a huge boon to productivity, right?
I mean, I could like even put these three stages into different words. So like the build stage is simply the compilation.
Yep.
The release stage is simply the transferring the files, right? And the run stage is the actual execution of it.
Yep.
Right? Like that's in its simple as what this is. And that's why I'm trying to say that, like, you know, make the point that as much as, you know, continuous deployment is an amazing thing,
It's not required.
it's not, you know,
But they also talk
required
about a
for this.
rollback, so you do have to have a rollback in place, which can simply mean backing up the folder that was there and then being able to, you know, quickly, you know, switch back over to it if something goes wrong.
Yeah, I mean, again, you know, this being Heroku and, you know, definitely Ruby-ish, you know, they're talking about environments where you could just, you know, have one of the examples they give is, you know, each release is a different version numbered subdirectory, right? Not a timestamped subdirectory, but and you just have a release subdirectory that is a symlink to whatever version you want to be the current running version.
Right.
But rollbacks are scary. Like, sometimes there are side effects if you change data or you add columns to the database or, you know, some other service. Then there can be real implications to rolling back.
Oh, yeah. Especially in a production system.
Yep.
In a staging or a development environment, maybe not so big, but
Not in a 12-factor app. Oh, sorry.
right. You start making data changes in the real world, and there are some implications to what you got to do.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, I got a buddy who says if you're talking about rolling back, then your continuous delivery is broken. And you need to speed up your pipeline so you can roll forward and fix stuff quickly.
and
I would agree
honestly,
with that.
I actually do agree with that. I've worked with people that like their knee-jerk reaction is to roll back, and
I mean, just fix the problem.
yeah, fix the problem. I mean, unless this is something that's going to lose your company, millions of dollars in time to try and get it done. But for the most part, if you've been on top of the situation and some anomaly comes up, you should have a pretty good idea of what it is and what it's going to take to get that thing resolved. And a lot of times, rolling back will take just as much time as fixing the problem in the first place.
Sometimes more.
Sometimes more. Like what Joe said a second ago, if there were major underlying architectural changes, it may not even be feasible to do.
I mean, I don't mean to, make Joe relive bad memories, but I definitely recall one weekend that he spent several hours after a rollback manually having to fix some data, if he recalls that.
Yes.
One January.
Oh, yes. So many times. So many dirty, dirty things I've done.
So just simply the point being is that, like, it's often, it is often far more time consuming to roll back.
Yeah. So, I mean, any managers that might be listening to this or whatever, definitely listen to the developer and find out, try and get a real judge of what the situation may be and then move forward with it.
Now, in fairness, though, the times where those rollbacks were so nightmarish, were they 12-factor apps?
Oh, man.
No.
Nothing we've worked on has ever been a 12-factor app. Come on.
Well, but my point being, though, is like, if it truly was a 12-factor app, right? If it truly was a 12-factor app, would rolling back be such a bad thing?
No, but still, there's still going to be changes that will be complicated, right? Like if it's a database, if you're upgrading a schema on a database, are you going to really want to roll that schema back to a point before it? So, I mean, even in a 12-factor app, these kind of things can come up. I mean, there's definitely situations where it's not going to be so easy.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean to insult, but it definitely feels like they were living in a bubble for some of these.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean,
or I've just like really not had the pleasure.
Yeah.
I mean,
they're guidelines.
in all honesty, right? Like most apps aren't all that clean. They just aren't because they grow organically over time. We've talked about this before, and in all fairness, if you could write everything perfectly from the beginning, nothing would probably ever get done. Right?
Well, I mean, I not to harp on the data issue, but I keep thinking about like scenarios where, especially in like live environments where, where you get a lot of traffic, right? Once you make that schema change,
You're done.
yeah, I mean, you can't. What are you doing to do? Like, so, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, highly
Rolling back-
transactional systems is not. And half the time, a rollback takes twice as long. Like in data, if you try and update something and it starts going sideways, and you try and roll back, that rollback may take twice as long as the initial update you tried to do. So,
well, as we were talking about this, I was trying to think of scenarios like, well, what about if you took a snapshot of the database so that you could like have that as a backup, but then you might have, like, for example, you mentioned transactional, makes me think of like orders. Mm-hmm. If you had a live e-commerce site and you have orders coming in, well, you don't want to lose those orders, so you can't just roll back to the other version of the database. And
Right.
if this is all live, so yeah, I like what Joe said best.
roll forward.
Yeah, just keep rolling forward. Like if you have to roll back, then that should be a code smell that something is wrong with your deployment process.
Yeah. So, all right.
Well, the importance that they assigned to this one was the word conceptual. That's a little bit hard to interpret, but I've got the page up here, and basically they say from a practical perspective, the tools and framework that you use will define best practices for building, deploying, and running your apps. So just kind of follow it, and it's going to take care of it, for better or for worse. And I agree with that. And for the most part, like, I don't know how you would do it another way, you know?
No, this seems pretty status quo. Like, yeah. I mean, this is almost just a part of anything that you do anyway, so.
Yep. I just thought it was interesting to have these 3 well-defined steps. And there are definitely things, you could do in, say, like a .NET world. You could kind of build debug for one thing and then build release for another. You could use web transforms and things that kind of blur the lines between these 3 steps. So it's just kind of interesting and a nice guideline to try and keep those separate.
Cool.
Well, I think if you're doing the web transforms, though, that would break this. You'd be breaking this part of the 12-factor app.
But yeah, the web,
using...
web config is already kind of breaking it, right? Because you've got a bunch of config type stuff that's now no longer associated with the environment; it's associated with the code.
Well, no, the transform only happens when you deploy. It doesn't happen on a build.
No, it happens on a build. The web transform happens on a build because it puts a copy of the web config in each of the folders. Yeah, it's build time.
Yeah, it actually modifies the XML of the web config.
Of the web config.
But as far as your point, Joe, about like the things that are in the web config, you could still adhere to the config chapter of the 12-factor app with a .NET app. I mean, it's that is more dependent upon like what do you put in that web config, right? So they don't want you to put things that are going to change environment to environment, like database credentials. That's
right.
where they want things in some other configuration. And I think we talked about the machine config or the user configs for something like that. But they want the things that are code specific that need to be in there in order for the application to run. That can go in that web config.
Right,
and that would adhere to the 12-factor app just fine.
I concede that point.
I don't know about the conceptual stuff there for the importance. That seems like
kind of odd.
It seems like a necessary thing. Like you have to build, you have to release, you have to run. How can you call it conceptual?
Well, conceptually, you have to do that.
Okay. Well, because if in reality you don't,
right? Well, it
then
just won't work.
You got a 0-factor app,
right? That's right.
All right. Well, let's move along here. I think we beat that one a little much. So, we've said this before, and I don't mind asking again. But if you haven't already, we greatly appreciate it. Every time we read a new review, it makes each of us a little giddy inside. We really do appreciate it, and it really does mean a lot to us. And it helps us a lot with other people when they run across the podcast in whatever source they're looking at, and they're like, "Hey, I wonder if this will be any good." And they read your review. It really does help. So we really do appreciate that. So if you haven't already left us a review, please do. You can go to iTunes or Stitcher. You can quickly go to codingblocks.net/review, and there's quick links there to help you get to your source. And if those aren't one of the places that you want to leave a review, pick your podcast aggregator of choice and let us know. We'd be interested to know, some of the sources that people are using to find us out there.
This episode is sponsored by Infragistics. Design before you build with Indigo Studio. Share and collaborate on designs with indigodesigned.com and build high-performance, enterprise-ready desktop and web line of business apps and mobile apps in your platform of choice. Be that WPF, Windows Forms, ASP.NET, HTML5 and JavaScript, iOS, Android, or Xamarin. Head over to Infragistics.com to view sample apps and see those tools in action, and get started with your free trial today.
All right, this brings us to part 6, processes. So this has to do not so much with your application, but with the various kind of executables that run around it, things like scheduled tasks, cron jobs, stuff like that. And the goal here, or at least the guideline, is to execute that app as one or more stateless processes. And I actually apologize. This does refer to the application as well, just to kind of encompasses those other things as well. And the goal here is to stay stateless and share nothing, including not sharing memory or disk storage.
Yeah, so this is kind of like, when I was hinting at before when I was talking about sessions, because this specifically does get into it specifically calls out, if you're using sticky sessions, for example, which if you're not familiar with sticky sessions, let's say that you have multiple app servers that are serving up your website, and randomly as new users come in, some load balancer decides which one of those servers should take that request, right? And there's different algorithms that are used to decide how that gets balanced. But, what you want is then in the second request that user makes, you might have a need for them to come back to the same server. And that's what's called a sticky session. And so in that case, what happens is the load balancer says, oh, well, this guy has already visited once before. I'm going to send him back to the same one that he went to the first time. And I'm going to keep routing his traffic to that same box until he's done, right? Until his sticky session expires. And, in the 12-factor app here in chapter 6 of processes, they specifically call out sticky sessions as a bad thing, right? Like if your box needs sticky sessions, then you're doing it wrong. And they specifically call it, you should use something like a memcached or Redis in order to save that data.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of really good reasons for doing this. And one is scalability. If you've got sticky sessions turned on and you add a new box, then only new people are going to ever get to it. And it's going to take a long time to actually balance that load. And same thing with killing boxes. You're introducing points of failure. If you're in a checkout process or something and, you're storing that in session, then if that box dies, you might get kicked out to the beginning of checkout again. Or, even worse, you might lose your card or whatever. And that's all really bad. You're actually, you're introducing points of failure.
Yeah, and I mean, when it comes down to it, there's a lot of options for not having to do that, which is, in ASP.NET, you have your session state service. And they mention a lot of times you back it with a database or something like that. But, I mean, just about everything has something available to do this. And when you do something like sticky sessions, never mind the fact that you can't even... It takes new people to start balancing out these new servers. The other thing that stinks about it is nothing takes into consideration the load on those servers at that point in time. So if you actually had a real load balancing type solution in place, it's not going to be leveraged, right? You could have one server that's at 90% CPU utilization, another one that's at 0, but because, those people are stuck on that other box, there's nowhere to go. So there's a lot of reasons not to do this, and there's a lot of options for not having to do it. So, I mean, this one's actually fairly easy to do. You just have to architect your application in a way that takes advantage of it.
Yeah, well, okay, so you mentioned architecture, right? So there's one statement in here in chapter 6 where they say that the 12-factor processes are stateless and share nothing, right? And that sounds kind of crazy at first because we're talking about like, well, you don't want any saved session data on a particular app server. Instead, you want that to be done by some other backing service like a memcache, right? That all of these processes would then, these app server processes could then share, right? Which seems like, well, wait a minute, it's supposed to be stateless and share nothing, right? So I almost want to rephrase that statement to say the 12-factor processes are stateless and know nothing, right?
Yeah, I like that.
But the reason why they called it shared nothing is based off of, or at least I'm assuming, based off of the architecture, the shared nothing architecture.
Yeah. Which is old, by the way. I had just this is the first time tonight that I had heard this term before, and I looked it up, and it was actually developed by this guy, Michael Stonebreaker, awesome name, in 1986 when I was 6. Yep. So it's kind of funny. It only, at least as far as I know, became really popular with the kind of rise of Google and Facebook and that sort of like commodity hardware type of hosting. And so it was just kind of funny to see it coming back from so long ago.
So it's using a shared nothing architecture, but really you need to think about this as stateless and know nothing. Because I really interpret that as like that's the way they want. If we go back to the session data as the example, right? So in the scenario that you each described, if you were to pop in a new app server into your load balancer, you want it to be able to pick up right along with wherever they are in the shopping experience. Customers could randomly go, each request that they make, each click that they make to the next page could take them to any one server. They're not going to keep going to the same app server over and over and over, right? So and that's because each one is stateless and knows nothing about the session. All of that is coming from some other shared backing service.
It's kind of funny, though, because it says it has to be stateless. And it's weird because it is in the term that there is not a session, but you're still relying on a database or you're relying on a memcache. It's not that you're not going to have that shared data. It's just that it's not relying on one piece of hardware to do it, because then it kills your scalability, right?
Well, I think it's stateless as in like you don't have to initiate, one of those run apps. You don't have to use like a memento pattern. You're not like bringing in some kind of state in order for the app to even start up, right?
Right.
It can start up and exist. Like making a database connection, I don't really consider that's not part of it.
No, but I mean, I guess one of the things here is like the whole thing with session. Like if it goes away, it shouldn't kill you. You should be able to bounce to another server and do it, right?
Right.
But the whole idea is, though, there's still something backing that. Now, if it's a database, there's a single point of failure there. So it's just kind of curious that they're saying they move it so that you can basically scale out horizontally, right?
Well, okay, but that database doesn't have to be a single point of failure. That's all in how you architect your database layer.
Yeah, good point.
And specifically, not we keep beating up on session as the example here, but they actually specifically call out other caching, session-based services to cache that session data. Right?
Okay, yeah.
Ooh, I got a good one. One example of that of kind of a bad thing to do in this situation is file uploads. If you've ever uploaded a file and stashed it somewhere on disk temporarily and then dealt with it again in like later requests, like say you cropped the photo or whatever, that's the kind of thing that you would need to put that in some sort of shared location, because you never know who's going to get that next request.
Yeah, that's a really good example.
Yep.
And same goes for processes. Kind of mentioned that earlier, but sometimes I've seen processes that will like phase one will kind of create a file, and then phase two will go read that file and do something else, and put it somewhere else, and it just makes for a flow that's very heavily dependent on knowing what the last state was of some other process, which is just not a great practice.
Yeah, it makes scaling pretty much impossible.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's actually that example hits on two of those scenarios, Joe. One is being the state of it, knowing like where you are in the processing of that file, but then the other one is if a second request were to come in, it might not have access to that file.
Right.
So.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that pretty much wrapped that one up. That one was pretty short and sweet.
Yeah, I mean there was like specifically, I do want to like make one little caveat though to the file, because if operating on that file is in one transaction, right, then that's okay, right?
Yeah, they even say that
because using disk space or memory space locally at the time of processing some request, that can be considered just a local cache, and that can be okay in that scenario. It's the subsequent use of it. So in Joe's example that he gave, where some other step or process needed to be able to know what step you were at in processing the file, right? That's where it becomes a problem.
Well, yeah, I mean a file upload's a perfect example of that, because when it first uploads, if it's a web page, right, it goes to a temporary spot on the server. And then if you're going to move that into a more accessible location, there is another step there that has to happen. So that's a perfect example of, temporarily, just until you get it into a better place that can be used by other pieces. That's fine. That's really unavoidable in most cases. So, And then, what's the, what'd you find on the importance on that one, Joe?
They said high, and I wish there was something higher than high, because I really like this one.
Higher than high.
Yep.
You can make it critical, right?
Like I can't feel my face when I'm,
God, that song.
Stateless.
By the way,
And I love it.
Come on, man. Like, okay,
It's the weekend.
Let's get into pop culture for
Oh,
just a
my
moment.
God.
Wait,
You're
I
seriously-
can't feel my face when I'm with you. What does that even mean,
I guess you'll know it when you know it.
man?
Have you never had tequila?
Wait, that stuff that you could smell on yourself like 3 days later?
You eat the worm, man, and you'll know what the song's about.
So the next time you're with your significant other and you'd be like, I can't feel my face when I'm with you. Like, they're supposed to really think that's something special, right?
You say, "Oh, you're so sweet."
Yeah.
And there's coding blocks on pop culture.
Sorry about that. Man, they're just so, like, this song is so catchy, but it is seriously some of the worst lyrics I think I've ever heard.
And I love it.
Say what? Oh, man, we
Way to
came off the
derail it.
rails. That's awesome.
Nice. All right, so yeah, they say it's high, and Joe says it's higher than high.
Yeah,
And I love
I
it.
think that one's pretty important.
Yep.
Yeah, they specifically have a blurb here that says that not only is a stateless app more robust, but it's easier to manage, generally easy for me to say, incurs fewer bugs and scales better. So higher than high, according to Joe. Like Willie Nelson high. How's that? Like your whole lifetime of high.
More pop culture.
All right, so there's some resources that we like that we will include in the show notes. Clearly, Tech is obviously going to be one again, and obviously the 12-factor app. And again, if you didn't listen to the first one, certainly go back and listen to episode 32 for the first 3 chapters. But know that if you were to try to go find the 12-factor site on your own, it's 12 as in the number, factor.net. All right. So let's get into Alan's favorite portion of the show.
Or tip of the year.
The tip of the week. What you got, Alan?
So my tip of the quarter is...
Oh my God.
It feels like it anyways.
You know, it is a weekday that we are recording this. I feel like tip of the week is an appropriate name for this segment.
If we ever do the tip of the weekend. One of these days we're actually going to send out a newsletter too. It's going to be interesting when it happens.
We still have a couple written.
People are going to be like, what's this coding blocks thing that came to me? Anyways, all right, so my tip is I was just helping somebody recently. I was watching them do some things, and they had a problem where their application was locking up. And it was clearly something to do with the database, which was backed by SQL Server. And if you've done this much, a lot of people go into Query Profiler and they start searching for things. They look for long-running execution times. Profiler can be a little bit daunting for people who haven't used it initially. And there's a lot of settings you can set. So
That's a lot is an understatement. It's like in the New York City of settings. It's crazy.
Yeah, there's a lot that you can do in there. And if you don't check the right things, then you actually won't get back data that will help you. So
You also must create your own templates that you just reuse.
Yeah, you should.
In order to make Query Profiler work for you.
yeah, I would agree. And it's funny because the ones that come out of the box are really just not very good.
Yeah, I don't get
so anyways, long story, still long, but I will try to get to the point here. One thing you can do if it's SQL Server, and I've taught several people this trick, you can do an SP_who2. And it's
Number 2.
Yeah, number 2. And this is basically a stored proc that comes bundled with SQL Server. It's kind of a hidden proc. And if you do SP_who2 and then in single quotes do active, it will show you all the active running processes. And if you leave off active, it'll actually show you all the processes that have been running at some point in time. But here's the cool part. So you do SP_who2 active, you can see a list of everything that's running. Then you can look for things that have a high CPU utilization, maybe a high disk IO, and haven't finished. And maybe they're even blocking. Now, in one of those columns, there's going to be an SP ID. That's your SPID, as they call it. It's basically your process ID. If you take that thing, this doesn't help you. You'll see that it'll say maybe there's a select running or an update running or a delete running. And that doesn't help you because you really don't know what the statement is bombing at that point in time. You just know that it's hanging up the machine. If you take that SPID that's associated with that row, and then, now you have to have rights to do this. A lot of times you might have to have sysadmin rights or at least elevated rights on the server to do this. You can run a dbcc space input buffer, and then in parens put that SPID. It will actually give you the query statement that is running that is causing all that CPU locking or the disk IO. So instead of just seeing select, you'll actually see your crazy query statement that might be breaking things. And it might not even be a nasty statement. It's just that maybe an index was bad or fragmented or statistics are out of date, whatever the case may be. This will actually get you to the answer quicker than going into Profiler. Now, the only caveat here is if the process finished, you're not going to see it in your SPHU2. So it's got to be something that is running and is blocking things for you to actually see it. But it is a nice, quick way to be able to troubleshoot things on SQL Server if you're having some performance issues.
Now, here's a bonus to that. Let's say you do your SPHU2, you do your DBCC input buffer, right? You see what your friends are doing out there, and let's assume that you have privilege.
Kill SPID.
Now do kill space and put that SPID in there just to like randomly mess with him.
I knew that's where you're going.
Their query stops and they have no idea what just happened.
This is only if you don't like the people you work with. Because, they've been working on this query all day.
There they are debugging their app, stepping through it. They're like, wait, what just happened?
Now, I will say, though, there have been more than a time or two where somebody will have opened a transaction and forgot to commit it or roll it back, and it will hang everybody attached to that server. Like, you can't do anything.
Right.
And then they went to lunch because they had plans, right? And so then you can freely kill whatever they did, right?
That's awesome.
Oh, but yeah, this is actually a very nice troubleshooting tool. A lot of people don't even know about it, and it is super helpful.
And you'd be surprised. You start killing processes and things run fast.
They do. That database backup that was running, who needed that?
Yeah, that's just...
I hate
We're a
seeing that
12-factor app. We don't need backups.
You should have stopped listening to our advice about a minute ago.
I hate seeing that word.
Derailment.
When you see select in that the SPHU2, every time I see the word select, I'm like, come on, that means you know what it is. You're just not telling me.
Because it won't give you the whole statement.
Yeah, it obviously knows.
That's awesome. Oh, by the way, here's another quick little tip for you. If it is a select and there's a ton of CPU and really the disk IO is really low, typically that's a bad index. Almost always. Or a missing index.
Say that again?
So if you see really high CPU utilization and very low disk IO, and it's a select, that's almost always guaranteed to be either a fragmented or a missing index, because basically SQL's having to join everything in its memory to get things done. So
yeah, if you also find those SPIDs that are waiting,
that
are runnable, they'll be runnable.
Yep.
Those can often be your friend's SQL Server management studio sessions, because every window, if you notice, every window you open up, it'll have in parentheses what the SPID is of that window.
Yep.
Right? So if you wanted to like disconnect your friends.
Yeah, you can kill all their open connections.
There you go. Yeah. Sorry.
Evil.
I had a connection killed on me the other day.
Oh, it wasn't me. I've never actually done this.
I've only recommended this to other people.
Yeah, I read about it somewhere.
I've never done this.
Oh, that's convenient.
Yeah.
I totally believe you guys.
Yep, you should.
Would I lie?
I found some great oceanfront property in Arizona.
Right. All right. So, Joe, what you got for the tip of the week?
All right. So this tip is from Andy Joyner, our buddy at Techies UK, and he tipped me off to Tortoise Git, which I know Outlaw is already gritting his teeth because it's not,
I'll reserve
Bash
my
Git.
comment.
But what it's really nice for, and Alan kind of sold me on this inadvertently, but it's nice for partial commits when you're doing something like a rebase and you want to, kind of clean up your commits and get things in there in a nicer, cleaner way, then this is really nice. And it's also nice, like, sometimes I just don't want to type anymore. I get tired.
Okay.
So laziness is the key here.
All the
So
best
just
programmers are
know-
lazy.
Just know that
That's a good point.
I hate you a little bit inside for mentioning a Git GUI tool as a tip of the week.
Take it.
As long as the Git GUI tool is not Visual Studio, I'm somewhat okay with it. Visual Studio is probably the most hamstrung Git interface I've ever seen. It's
horrible.
It's beyond terrible. Like I've had to help so many people that have decided they were going to use that to where it's like, come on, dude.
It's purposely. It's. I don't know how else to put this, so I hope this is a good PC way to put it. But it's like purposely crippled. Like they don't have all of the functionality there.
They don't even have a handful of functionality. Like
There's so many features you can't.
you
do.
won't hear me typically bash on Visual Studio, but in this case, like, dude, just leave it out of there. Let somebody build a plugin that works because.
Man, no, the plugins are just as bad.
Oh, really?
I have never seen a good plugin for it.
Man,
Forget it. It's over. Just do command line.
That's because Git's crazy. Git is schizophrenic.
What?
It really
but
is.
I agree. Like, if you go through the RTFM, which if anybody ever sends that to me, I may actually just sign off of social media forever. But if you go through it, it's incredibly complicated. But if you learn the basics and you learn them very well, Git by command line is actually fairly elegant and easy to follow. Like, there are the edge cases where you have to do something crazy. For the most part, that's never the case.
Yeah, sometimes it's like, how do I revert a commit? And it's like, well, pull up a chair.
No, dude, I did it the other day. Git revert, and then you just put in the hash, right? Like, it's so easy. Anyways, all right, done rant.
Yeah, I can't support this tip of the week.
I did
Joe.
not mean to hijack your tip. I think it's fantastic. I guess.
I mean, I guess Andy helped you with this one, come up with that one, but I still.
And we like Andy.
Just know I can't support that.
Yeah, we like Andy, so we're gonna let this one fly for right now.
All right, so here's my tip of the week, and I need to backtrack a little bit for a moment here. So,
By the way, his tip says we're lazy. That's. I have no idea where this is going.
Pull up a chair.
I'm pretty sure that's self-explanatory way to give it away. So okay. Went to a new meetup. It was really good. Right? There's a Node.js meetup here in the Atlanta area. And while the meetup itself was very good and entertaining, I'm not trying to take anything at all away from that experience. One of the interesting things that happened though, afterwards, everybody was kind of getting to know each other, talk, and share experiences and whatnot. And so, I was talking with the guy who runs the meetup, that particular Node.js meetup. And, during our conversation, he happens to mention that he has his own podcast. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of neat. Now, as soon as he told me the name of the podcast, I was immediately jealous. This is the most awesome name. For a coding related podcast, this is the most awesome name. I was disappointed in myself that I didn't think of it. You ever have those situations where somebody thinks of something so simple, but yet its simplicity is exactly its elegance for that particular thing, right? And this was one of those examples. I was like, oh man, that's an incredible name for it. That's awesome.
Give it up.
So
Quit teasing.
So on top of that, and here's where our laziness kicks in.
You're still doing it.
Right. I'm getting there. Hang with me. So on top of that, this is where our laziness kicks in, right? Because he and his co-host, they have, or at the time, had 7 episodes recorded. And the way that he introduces this to me is he goes, hey, I don't know if you listen to podcasts, but here's my card. It hands me this business card. And I'm like, after all the flipping time we spent trying to come up with a new logo, and we still don't have any business cards.
Oh man,
And they're 7. They're 7 in. Not only do they have this great name, but these business cards are beautiful.
Give it to me. Come on.
So, check that out. The show title is Pseudocode. And I thought, that's an amazing name.
Like SUDO?
Yeah. SUSPSEU.
How else would you spell pseudocode?
Yeah.
SUDO? Pseudo?
Not
Baby sandwich?
that kind of... Okay, fine.
That would have been pretty good too.
Pseudo code, that it?
I'm thinking spin-off podcast.
Check out that business card is like serious quality, right? And I gave them a listen, and it's you can go to pseudocode.fm, or you can find them in iTunes. I don't know if they're on other platforms, but they're definitely available in iTunes, and they are like some of their content, like I met Joe that and I don't know how to pronounce his last name exactly, so I'm probably going to butcher this, but DiCarlo, Joseph
right.
DiCarlo.
Yeah, that looked right.
So him and his co-host Emlyn Murphy, and both of these guys. I mean, I have been at various meetups around the Atlanta area over the years, and have heard both of them present topics. Both guys that really know what they're talking about, and this was a lot of the topics that they talked about. I was like, wow, that's kind of like in the same vein of what we do, except where a lot of times we give .NET examples, they do Objective-C.
Okay.
So I thought that was kind of like here's our Bizarro world opposite, right? I thought that was interesting.
When did you go to this meetup?
It was last Thursday, because it was the Node.js meetup here in the Atlanta area, and I mean, it was really good. So my tip of the week. So definitely go give them a listen at pseudocode.fm. And but the tip of the week really though is don't be lazy like us, because we're 33 episodes in now, and we still, like, anytime I meet somebody at a meetup, I have nothing to give them to say, like, oh, you go listen to my show.
I will say I've been trying to get us business cards for a while, but here's one thing.
I'm not blaming.
Here's one thing I will say though, like, and we hadn't actually said anything to anybody. Man, we had a whole slew of problems, like a few weeks back. Like,
oh God, you're talking about when we dropped out of the store by accident?
Dropped out.
That?
Like, the first thing that we noticed was, I think Jay-Z noticed, was that our latest episode wasn't showing in iTunes, and we're like, what's going on? And then, like, 3 days later, we disappear. And so, like, all this stuff, all our excitement about getting...
actually a little more than 3.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't...
Like 6.
Okay, yeah. But it was not very fun, because here we are. We were all stoked about getting our logo done and everything, and we had some momentum. We were pushing forward, and then, like, we got slapped. Like, we spent days trying to figure out what was going on, and it was not fun.
And do you know what it was? It was a rest verb. If only
right.
they were using gets and posts like you should. And none of those other 6 weirdo ones.
No, yeah, options, right?
No, they were doing head.
So first you're stepping out with other Joes. And now you're promoting these weirdo rest methods.
Yeah, because they're good. They're necessary.
All right, well, I'm going to find another Git tip for next week.
And like
non-console.
a Git GUI tip.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. Like, I'm not blaming any one of us. We're all at fault. My point, though, is that, like, I'm willing to give us the last month, because, we did run into some complications there. But,
man,
we're 33 episodes in now. We've been doing this since 2012. 2012 now, because we did our first recording in late 2012.
Very late.
We still, when this man came up to me and handed me this business card, and for those of you listening that can't see this business card, this thing's got some girth to it, man.
Yeah,
this
it's
is
fatter than my wallet.
This is like this business card is like what you would be handed at a bar to put your drink on. It's that
really
kind of
is.
thick. Like, this is like a burger with strength.
Yep.
No, but now, in all fairness, this does make me feel a little bit better at this point in time, is they still only have 7 episodes. And while we may be late to the game with coming with new episodes, they definitely have some time in between theirs too. So they literally are the parallel universe to us with Objective-C. So
Yeah, I talked with him about that too. They do strive to be a weekly, but yeah, definitely have had real world kind of, like us, have had real world situations get into the way of, being able to accomplish that goal.
yeah,
But, give it a listen. There was some good stuff in there.
cool. Yeah, I'll check it out. And
don't be lazy.
We will have some business cards and we will have some stickers and whatnot because we
See,
need
it's the stickers that I want.
Yes, we need to adorn Outlaw's MacBook if he's got any room left on it.
Yeah, man.
With a new sticker, and I'm sure Joe's going to put one on there too.
Yep.
I think
Joe's going to put a sticker on my laptop.
I might. Yeah,
That's going to be awkward.
yeah, I'm going to do it too. I'm going to get one for my car. Yeah,
I'll do that too.
yeah. So, anyways, we are going to get some things, but yeah, it literally was a rough month with having to troubleshoot problems. I mean, you learn a lot doing this kind of stuff. So
And I think life just beat all of us up individually too.
man.
We all individually got put through the dryer.
It really has been a rough several weeks. So
Yeah.
But
All right.
But we do love doing this. Like, we were all stoked. I mean, even tonight was a challenge, right? We're all like, man, maybe we can make tonight.
I'm surprised Joe's still awake.
Yeah, Joe's not actually still awake. We don't know
I've
who
been
we're
asleep.
talking to.
I've been asleep for 30 minutes.
Now that I look at the video, that doesn't look like Joe at all.
Yeah, he's now called Left Eye. Because one of them's open, one of them's not.
Yep.
So
Squinty.
All right. Well, we hope you've enjoyed listening to this episode of Coding Blocks and catching up on chapters 4, 5, and 6 of the 12-Factor app, which were the backing services, the build, release, run, and processes. So check out episode 32 for chapters 1, 2, and 3. And be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, and more using your favorite podcast app. And be sure to give us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or whatever podcast aggregator you prefer to use. We greatly appreciate it.
Yep, and contact us with a question or a topic. Leave your name, preferred method of shout out, and we'll mention you on the podcast. Also, visit us at www.codingblocks.net, where you can find all our show notes, examples, discussions, and more.
And send your feedback, questions, and rants to comments@codingblocks.net. And follow us on Twitter @codingblocks.
And we've actually been keeping up our Facebook page a little bit more here lately, haven't we?
Yeah, it's fun.
There's this thing called Facebook that we found out about. So.
Yeah, I actually post pictures there. I don't know why I don't do that on Twitter too, but
There's not enough characters. It eats up half of them. So
that's true.
yeah.